All right, good morning. We're going to get the meeting started. It is 9:32 on Thursday, March 27th. Welcome to the Delta Stewardship Council March meeting. We are here at the CNRA building in downtown Sacramento. I'll ask Beck, are you going to do the roll call?
I am.
All right, Beck standing in for Emma. So in accordance with our Bagley-Keene requirements, we'll conduct a roll call of the council members to establish a quorum.
Councilmember Burgess.
Here.
Councilmember Damrell. Councilmember Wiese. Councilmember Maranian. Councilmember Miller. Absent. Councilmember Zengali.
Here.
Chair Lee.
Here. All right, we have a quorum, so we'll get this meeting started. We are going to exit into a closed session to discuss pending litigation, and we plan to return by 10 a.m. So thank you, and we will see you shortly. Welcome back. We're going to reconvene in open session, and I'll ask Beck to do a roll call for our quorum again.
Councilmember Burgess.
Here.
Councilmember Damrell. Councilmember Wiese. Councilmember Maranian. Councilmember Miller. Councilmember Zengali.
Here.
Chair Lee.
Here. And we have nothing to report out from closed session. We'll move on to our public comment portion. This item is for public to comment on any topic not on the council's agenda. Any comments on items on the agenda need to be taken during that item. Beck, do we have any public comments for items not on today's agenda?
No, Madam Chair, we do not.
Right. Our next item is the consent calendar. We have 3 items on the consent calendar. The first is the adoption of the February 27th, 2025 meeting summary. The second is our contract with the University of California, Davis to fund San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Science Journal publication. And the third is the amendment to the contract with the Regents of the University of California, San Diego for our Sea Grant Fellows. So before we take a vote, are there any public comments on the items on the consent calendar?
No, Madam Chair.
All right. If not, then I will entertain a motion to approve these items. Second. All right. Moved by Member Hueso, seconded by Councilmember Miller, and we will proceed with a roll call vote.
Councilmember Burgess.
Yes.
Councilmember Damrell. Councilmember Wiese. Councilmember Maranian.
Yes.
Councilmember Miller. Councilmember Zengali.
Yes.
Chair Lee.
Yes. All right, our vote passes. Our next item is the chair's report. Have a few things to talk about that happened this month. We went on a flood ops tour at DWR and got a lot of information from the National Weather Service, the NOAA people there, about how they prepare for floods. It was very, very interesting to see how they fit into the state's bigger emergency management system and how that all can affect things in the Delta. Member Hueso went with us, so I was going to turn it over to him for his impressions of the tour.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. It was a really interesting tour to see how these matters are handled, especially in the wake of a lot of the disasters that we've had. I've always imagined that there is a place in California where these matters are observed and prevented, but I've never actually been there. So this was a really educational visit for me in particular to see what is handled there, who is there working on things, and really how this is the point where information is disseminated to people in the press, people in the first responders. So it was very impressive to see that in action and to see all the information that is being conducted statewide from that point. So I'd like to thank the chair and staff for conducting that tour and inviting us.
Yeah, it was super informative. I was very impressed by the amount of science that goes into measuring the river flows and rainfall that all helps make decisions about flows out of some of the reservoirs and other things. So it's just very, very interesting. We also did a tour just last Friday of Victoria Island. This is where there was a breach back in October, and so we were able to talk to the engineers and actually go out there and see where the breach was and see how they handled it. It starts at the local response level and then went up to the county and eventually to the state for those repairs. It's very, very interesting to talk to the engineers about how our levees are constructed in the Delta, how old some of them are, and some of the frailties that they have. And it really impressed upon me the importance of our D-list work. Members in Gali went with us on that tour. So Daniel, do you want to chime in with any of your impressions about that tour as well?
Sure, thank you. I also found it very informative, and just learning about how when you're in a time-sensitive crisis like that, how they navigate issues of jurisdiction and chain of command, and kind of threats on all sides. The threat to property, in this case, vast almond orchards, but also the threat to water quality from tanks of fertilizer, tanks of fuel, like so many things happening so fast. It was having them walk us through it was kind of like watching an action movie, to be honest. It was really riveting.
Yeah, I felt the same way. And Highway 4 goes right through the middle of Victoria Island. So it was really important to, the corridor between the Central Valley and the Bay Area as well. And I think that JP is going to talk a little bit more about this when she does her executive officer's report. And my last item was we held another meet and greet. This was with Senator Cabaldon, where we were able to share some information about the work that the science program is doing at the Delta Stewardship Council, as well as share sort of what our appeals process is with him. And it was just a really good back and forth conversation. He's very supportive of our work. And I think Brandon's going to talk a little bit more about him when he gets to our bill proposal in the legislative section of this. So I'll add any other members. Is there anything that anyone wants to talk about during the chair's report? Anything else? Yes, Diane.
You joined us at the National Heritage meeting as well. And I just wanted to let you know that on the Delta Protection Commission approved the National Heritage Area Partnership Program memoranda and reviewed the National Heritage Area Management Plan. We also got a presentation from Virginia Gardner on the socioeconomic indicators, and they referred to the Delta Resident Survey. Is that what it was called? And so we talked about, kind of taking the data from both of those and doing a presentation. And finally, we had a really great presentation. One of the things that I've done at the Delta Protection Commission is to incorporate into our agenda at least one item that helps us actually look at the Delta and see it, because it has so many different facets. And so we had a really great presentation from Rich Turner from Soundings Magazine that showed some historical and beautiful pictures of the Delta. And so I would encourage this council to look at maybe trying to incorporate that periodically to really help folks that may not necessarily live in the Delta to really understand it, since we are stewards of the Delta. Thank you.
Perfect. Great. Next, is Amanda Bowl online?
She's not able to be with us. Brandon's going to take her DPIC update.
Okay, got it. So next, Brandon's going to talk to us about the upcoming Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee, better known as DPIC.
Thanks, Shirley. Is this working?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm stepping in for Amanda today, who couldn't make it. I'm going to provide a brief update on just Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee activities over the past month, and as well as give a preview of some upcoming events. So first, the Restoration Subcommittee, which has been quite active. As you recall, the formation of the subcommittee was included as a recommendation in the recent amendment to Chapter 4 of the Delta Plan, also known as the Ecosystem Amendment. And on March 13th, the subcommittee met to discuss how we can collectively continue to reduce barriers to restoration of the Delta, and this included a presentation from Sustainable Conservation on their recent report on accelerating restoration in Sacramento Valley and beyond. The subcommittee also discussed connections between Delta Adapts and the Restoration Subcommittee's work, namely joint interest in working with tribes, prioritizing multi-benefit projects, and permitting streamlining, among many other things that they discussed. Next up for the subcommittee is a Delta Restoration Forum, which will be held on May 1st at the Clarksburg Schoolhouse. This is the third time the subcommittee has hosted this event, which provides locals and restoration practitioners with the opportunity to learn about what's going on in the Delta, both currently and planned for restoration in the Delta. And in the past, the forum has been really well received and included participation from both local, state, and federal partners, as well as the community and tribes, I believe, as well. So a great event that we're looking forward to in May. Secondly, of coming up is next Thursday is the spring DPIC gathering, something that we're really looking forward to. So the larger Delta Protection or Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee will also gather at Clarksburg Schoolhouse on the 3rd. The meeting will focus on how restoration and cultural resources from the Delta for protecting the Delta as an evolving place, of a presentation by state park staff, as well as efforts to create a new state park in the Delta known as Delta Meadows. Weather permitting, will be touring the Delta Meadows Park location, as well as the Locke Boarding House, which is co-managed by State Parks and the Locke Foundation, and was also partially funded by Prop 68 funds through the Delta Conservancy. The meeting will also include a discussion on the rollout and implementation of Prop 4 funds, particularly in the Delta. As you know, this was the $10 billion bond that passed by voters last November. The bond directly allocates $179 million for Delta needs to two of the DPIC agencies, the Delta Conservancy and Department of Water Resources for levee protection. But there's a need in it for investment in the Delta is significantly over $2.4 billion is what's been identified for identified projects and flood protection efforts. And so we'll hear from the Conservancy and DWR as well as other DPIC agencies on including CNRA, the California Natural Resources Agency, Department of Food and Ag, and the Water Board about just plans for the Prop 4 funds going forward. We've also invited the Wildlife Conservation Board and state parks to participate in the discussion as well, as they also are receiving funding through Prop 4. So as I said, DPIC is particularly curious about how these funds could be used to find their way to Delta projects and programs, and hope to use a DPIC venue to start and continue the discussion about that. So if you're all able to join us on April 3rd, we welcome your attendance, and also remember to bring your raincoat because it is likely to be a little wet that day. With that, I'll open it up to any questions on any of that, and that's it for DPIC.
Thank you, Brandon. Does anybody have any questions for Brandon? Nope. Okay.
Great.
Seeing none, I'll go to public comment on this item.
There's no public comment, Madam Chair.
Okay. And we noticed Daniel's location, correct? So do I need to be asking Daniel?
You are so right.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
We have
Councilmember
no public comment here at this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next, we have the executive officer's report. So I'll turn it over to Jessica Pearson.
Thank you. I also had the pleasure of going down to Stockton and then attending to the Victoria Island presentation and tour. And so I really want to express my appreciation to Chris Nudek and Liz Ramos from KSN Engineering, who hosted us and spent their time generously with us on Friday morning, walking us through kind of start to finish what happened exactly on Victoria Island. That was also essentially unfolding while we were doing our fall DPIC meeting, which was focused on Delta levees. And so it's something that we've been all watching very closely, and it's fascinating to see the process and actually how planning ahead for having stockpiled materials nearby the location, that those were accessed for this project and likely led to a more timely resolution, as well as potentially a cheaper resolution by having those nearby. So, the policy decisions and discussions that we have here and that we had in the Delta Plan in 2013 matter and are having an impact on the ground. And so that was a big takeaway for me. And then also I had the pleasure of joining the Delta Independent Science Board on their tour of the Sassoon Marsh. This was last week. It was beautiful weather. I've never been in the marsh with better weather. I mean, just green and lush and not windy, which is really unusual. We got to go to the Rush Ranch Open Space Preserve and the Montezuma Slough Restoration Site. We also talked about the salinity control gates that are located there. The marsh is vast. I mean, that's a takeaway is the Sassoon Marsh, you know, you see it on the map, you drive around, and it just really gives you a sense of the scale there and how important the work of the Resource Conservation District is in managing the duck clubs, the needs of the wildlife duck clubs, but also being sensitive to kind of emerging restoration plans for the region. And we really value our partnership with the Resource Conservation District. Shout out to Dylan Chappell on our staff who capably organized this tour and whose work in the marsh with Steve Chappell at the Resource Conservation District is really making a difference on the ground as well. We did have a new covered action certification come in. This was on March 20th by the County of Sacramento for the Zacharias Ranch Mitigation Bank. The proposed site is in Sacramento County at the downstream edge of the Upper McCullum Basin. The project aims to establish approximately 500 acres of tidal freshwater wetland and preserve, also a riparian forest acreage and emergent marsh for about 80 acres. So the public review period for this certification is open through April 21st. Information is available on the council's website under the Covered Actions tab. We sent a handful of comment letters this month. You know, typically we send letters for projects that may meet the definition of a covered action, inviting those individuals or proponents to come meet with the council in early consultation. So one of those topics was we sent a letter to Solano County regarding their cash flow mitigation bank project. We also sent a letter to the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, or SACOG, regarding their plan to prepare a sustainable community strategy. The Delta Reform Act actually has a special provision for consistency with sustainability, with sustainable conservation strategies and the Delta Plan. And so we invited them to begin working with us to have those consistency conversations. And we also sent letters of appreciation and support for a couple of our key partners that are facing uncertain futures and budget challenges right now, including the Romberg-Tiburon Estuary and Ocean Science Center. This is a research campus that's affiliated with San Francisco State, and it may face closure. Also, the California Sea Grant Program, which you'll hear about a little bit later in our Delta Research Awards. They are a huge partner for us, but they're part of NOAA, and so their funding future is also uncertain. Our work with Sea Grant really makes our Delta Fellowships possible and also makes our Science Research Awards process as robust and effective as it is. So we wanted to show our support for those programs. And speaking of Sea Grant, please join me in welcoming two of our 2025 California Sea Grant State Fellows. I'm not sure if either of them are in the audience. It looks like maybe no. Yes. Okay. Hollis Jones and Jonathan Huang are in our new California Sea Grant State Fellows. Hollis joins the Collaborative Science and Peer Review Unit after recently completing her PhD at UC Davis. As part of her PhD, she collaborated with Hog Island Oyster Company to refine strategies for climate resilience in California's oyster aquaculture industry. And she has a master's degree from Louisiana State University. Jonathan is going to be working with the Adaptive Management Unit of the Delta Science Program. He completed his master's at Cal State Northridge and has a bachelor's in marine sciences from UC Davis. We're also excited to welcome Katrina Sales, our new legal assistant, and Jorge is going to introduce her further during his legal update. Please take a look at your outreach highlights and active projects lists that are in your board packet. There were two topics that earned a lot of attention on our social media last month. First is our most recent podcast, which was produced by Sea Grant Fellow Dane Wicker, and that was on the hardest working levees in America. Got a lot of attention, and if you haven't listened to it yet, I highly recommend you do. And then second, Science Funding Program Manager Dylan Stern, who is in the audience and you'll hear from later, was selected by the Water Education Foundation as a 2025 Water Leader. There's always a group project for this program, and this year's cohort is going to be looking at how to modernize California's water rights systems to address climate change. You'll get to hear from Dylan in just a moment during the Research Awards presentation. And then just spotlighting the rest of our agenda, we'll have our Delta Lead Scientist report. You're going to hear from staff about our Delta Research Awards and Delta Science Fellows. We will then be joined by staff from the Department of Water Resources for a presentation on the proposed West Falls River Salinity Barrier Project. And then closing out our meeting this month will be an update from our Delta Water Master, Jay Ziegler. So that concludes my executive officer's report. Oh, actually, I need to turn to Jorge for the legal update. And then how can I forget Brandon for the legislative?
Before you do that, I'll forget if we move on. I just want to welcome the fellows, and we're all looking forward, Dylan, to you fixing climate change. So thank you for doing that. The earth is counting on you.
Madam Chair, could I?
Yes.
I'm really excited about today's meeting, that we get to like pause and appreciate all the work and maybe take a break. But I do think, Jessica and I were both fellows in a different way, and the work you're doing and your commitment to public service, like all of us really are better for it. And I think the only way this works, and this is an extraordinary time to be starting. And I'm just especially grateful because it really, really matters and makes a huge difference. And I think you're facing a lot of headwinds, and that actually makes your work more important. So I just want to like take a moment and say that I'm grateful, but really I'm grateful to the Delta Stewardship Council for recognizing how important your work is and how meaningful it is. And I just think it's an incredible way to create some energy and momentum to really sincerely improve the world. So thank you. And thank you, Jessica, for all you do to make this work.
Thank you for that. Jorge?
Okay, so it is my pleasure to introduce our new legal assistant, Katrina Sales. And Katrina's actually here. Katrina, maybe you can wave to everybody. So Katrina is our new legal assistant. And just a little bit about Katrina. She's from Tulare. You know, she has 2 daughters and 2 grandchildren. She's a graduate of Tulare Union High School and had her paralegal training at MTI College of Business. She started her legal career working for the Sacramento Public Defender before going to work for the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office. Then she worked for over 9 years in the Attorney General's Office in the Appeals Written Trial section. She subsequently worked for the State Personnel Board, you know, with administrative law, and is recently coming to us from a private firm. Katrina enjoys reading, wine tasting, concerts, and comedy shows. And she was interested in the Delta Stewardship Council because of her experience growing up in the Valley and knowing the importance of water. We're excited to welcome Katrina to the legal team, and I know that she's going to be a tremendous addition to the Delta Stewardship Council. So I just want to I hope everybody can join me in welcoming. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, thank you for that, and welcome, Katrina. And I'm going to turn it over to Brandon Chapin, who has our legislative update. And please note there is an action item here.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Chair Lee and members. Good to see you again. If we can get the PowerPoint up on the screen. I'll start with, so we have a few bills just to highlight it just as a more of an FYI for the council as we track these as they go through the process. Next slide, please. The first one is the aptly named AB 52. For anyone that works in local government or with the California Environmental Quality Act, you'll recognize the bill number. AB 52 deals with ensuring that there's tribal consultation on local projects and ensuring that they are part of the process. And so this is from Assembly Member Aguiar Curry and makes some changes to strengthen those consultation requirements when it comes to CEQA. So the first thing is just enhanced tribal consultation requirements, such as the inclusion, making sure that there's the inclusion of tribal knowledge and planning, treatment of burial sites and other tribal cultural resources is enhanced, as well as encouraging the use of conservation easements for tribes and development. And then lastly, prioritizing tribal methods of monitoring over archaeologists that might not necessarily be affiliated with a tribe. It also requires the Native American Heritage Commission to adopt regulations for determining which tribes are included on the contact list for reaching out to tribes, including making sure that there's a process for non-federally recognized tribes to be included on that list. So we'll continue to keep track of this one, just both in terms of the relation to the Council's Tribal Environmental Justice issue paper and with the CEQA process that the Council goes through with the Delta Plan. Next slide, please. Next is AB 274 by Assemblymember Ransom. This deals with abandoned and derelict vessels. Some of this might sound familiar to you from last year's when we took a position on the federal work on abandoned and derelict vessels. This bill would require the State Lands Commission to develop a inventory of abandoned and derelict recreational and commercial vehicles in the Delta. So this has just been introduced. It actually just had its first policy committee meeting Tuesday, I believe. We'll continue to keep track of it and keep you aware of it as it goes through the process. Next is AB 717 from Assemblymember Aguiar Curry. This deals with water rights for small restoration use. Right now, there is the ability for someone to take water without a water right if it's for small uses such as domestic irrigation and livestock stock ponds, small uses, and those are very clearly defined. This would add small restoration use to that ability to take water without a water right, which includes, which is basically a 42,000 gallon per day limit up to 20 acre feet total. So relatively small restoration sizes. And then also those projects must apply for a restoration management permit from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to be able to get that designation as well. So we'll continue to keep you updated on this as it goes through the process as well.
Brandon, can you say that again? I thought I heard 42,000 acre feet per day. That I know I didn't hear that right.
No, 42,000 gallons per day.
Okay,
up
thank
to
you.
20 acre feet.
All right,
total,
I just
yeah.
I figured I just wanted to make sure. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, no, yeah. Really expanding the size of small use. Next slide, please, is AB 1146 from Assemblymember Pappen. This deals with water releases from dams and would make it a misdemeanor to release water from dams under false pretenses. This, if you've been following the news, is very closely related to that, and just providing as an FYI going forward, and continue to keep you updated on that as well. And then lastly, I'm very excited to present SB 650. If you can go to the next slide, please. This is from Senator Cabaldon and deals with some changes to the minor changes to the Delta Reform Act. So, as you may remember, the council has over the last 15 years identified some best practices or things that might work to enhance the Delta Reform Act and provide some efficiencies and ways of going through the process. And so what this will do, if you can go to the next slide, does two things. So the first is establishes a 90-day statute of limitations for legal challenges to either the council's adoption or amendment to the Delta Plan or its appeals procedures, or the council's determination of an appeal to a certification of consistency. The second part is it adds the definition of a person to the Delta Reform Act for purposes of appeals. And it references a bunch of code sections, but it's primarily an individual person, a firm, association, organization, partnership, business trust, corporation, limited liability company or company, and also any city and county, special district, joint powers authority, or other political subdivision of the state, public utility, or mutual water company. So if you go to the next slide, just some background for why these changes might be necessary is, you can go to the next slide, please. For statute of limitations, this provides the council, interested parties, and covered action proponents with certainty as to the timing of litigation and helps expedite a prompt resolution. This is very similar to what the Delta Protection Commission and the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency currently have, which is actually 60 days. So this is 30 days longer and really allows projects to be able to move forward. Right now, statute of limitations is very broad depending on the process. It could be up to 3 years. And so this enables projects to not have potentially that. Oh, if you could put the PowerPoint back up, please. Allows it to the projects to have that certainty going forward. And then in terms of the person definition, this helps clarify the original intent and affirms common practice of an interpretation of who can appeal projects going forward. So if that, I'll stop there and answer it if there's any questions.
I have one.
Yeah.
If I may.
Okay.
First of all, I wanted to thank you for the follow-up from last time.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you very much. And my question was on the abandoned vessels.
Yeah.
And I know that that was a big water quality issue and all that. and there's gonna be an inventory, you said, of, I mean, or it says, right? And after the inventory, would you know who would be responsible or the bodies that are responsible to really actually pull this? I mean, I know that we've dealt with this for many years now, and it's been a major water quality issues. Is there any info on that yet, or?
Well, in terms of the inventory, there's no inventory now,
no
as my understanding. So this would charge the State Lands Commission to develop that inventory for the Delta. In terms of next steps, I think one thing that we talked about, I think last year, was that there is some uncertainty about, depending on the type of vessel, of who's responsible for removing it. Funding is also a very, very big issue in regards to removing those vessels. I think, for example, I think the local communities have some ability to do so, but then also State Lands Commission, if you'll remember, the federal bill allows the U.S. Army Corps to now remove those vessels as well if they're not in the right of way. So there's a lot of legal different definitions of who can and who can't, depending on the type of vessel, if it's in a right of way and things like that. So I think moving forward, that's still some of the issues that would need to be resolved going forward is maybe providing some clarity there, but the inventory is one aspect of getting a handle on it.
So,
I mean, it sounds like Councilmember Burgess might have
so
something
it
to do
could
on
be different agencies or bodies to deal with different issues or different kinds of vessels. But the inventory is done by the same, or even the inventory is not done.
Yeah,
by-
well, one part of Congressman Garamendi's bill last year was to
Yeah.
do a federal inventory, which would
Yeah.
include the Delta. That unfortunately did not end up getting included in legislation last year that passed. But this would specifically create one for the State Lands Commission to have one for the Delta.
Thank you.
Yeah, and an inventory would just be a snapshot for that particular point in time, because there's always more coming. I will say that we as a county try really hard to, remove it, but it is, we never have enough. And there's always been a budget for it, but there's never enough. I think it's also important to understand kind of the process. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll pull the boats up and drain them of the chemicals and then plop them back down because they don't have the money to actually remove them. And so it's expensive and it's a challenge. I think there's also been some legislation to limit who can buy certain types of boats as well, so that we can have people that are properly insured and
Yeah.
properly qualified to operate some of these boats. Because there was the cruise ship boat. I thought there was in the last couple of years where people were able to buy it and then weren't capable of, and then they just abandoned it, and it created a financial challenge and environmental challenge. So I appreciate Assemblywoman Ransom working on this issue. And I was going to ask you about, what was I going to ask you about? Because it was a really good question too. You were talking about, I think, oh, I know, it was Cabalden working with us. Is it 650? Is that what the number is?
Yep.
I had original concerns about the change from 36 months to 90 days, but then, as you explained, this is actually consistent and actually a little more generous than others. So
Yep.
I appreciate the discussion on this, and I will support that. So
Thank
I
you.
can make that motion if you need me to.
Can we put the PowerPoint back up? Because I want to read the motion into the record, and then I'll ask for a public comment before we take a vote.
Well,
Okay, any other comments or questions for Brandon?
do you want me to walk through the motion, or did you? Either way.
I can do it.
Okay, perfect.
All right, so what we're going to do is entertain a motion to authorize the executive officer and the legislative and policy advisor or their designee to convey a support position on SB 650 on behalf of the council and to undertake the activities necessary in consultation with the chair to ensure its successful passage through the legislative process.
So moved.
Right, Diane
Second.
moves it, and second by Councilmember Miller. And before we take a vote, we'll turn to public comment.
No, Madam Chair, there's no public comment.
No public
All
comment
right.
in Eureka.
Thank you, Daniel. All right, Beck, can you lead us in a roll call vote?
Absolutely. Councilmember Burgess.
Yes.
Councilmember Damrow. Councilmember Waso. Councilmember Maranian.
Yes.
Councilmember Miller. Councilmember Zingale.
Yes.
Chair Lee.
Yes. All right, the motion passes. And I'll turn it back over to JP. Is there anything else on your executive officer's report?
No, I just want to express my thanks to Brandon for all his hard work on this matter and more ahead. And that's all I have for my report. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, and I'll ask for any public comment on the entirety of the executive officer's report.
There's no public comment at the Sacramento location. Councilmember Zingale, any public comment from your location?
No, there's not.
All right, with that, we'll go to our next agenda item, which is our lead scientist report. So I'll introduce Dr. Lisa Marie Wyndham Myers.
Thank you, Chair Lee. Good morning, everyone. For this month's highlighted paper, I want to point out that I talked about water supply tracking last month. This time, we're going to focus on the other co-equal goal, ecosystem restoration. All good science builds on previous knowledge, and this paper is no different than that. Our science program does the same thing. We build out science like a scaffolding. As the first lead scientist said, we're small but mighty. We've got the gaps in the glue of building out the science enterprise here in the Delta. And we don't just grow science here, we also grow scientists. So it's given that you're going to hear about our research awards a little bit later, it's appropriate to highlight here one of our previous Delta Science Fellows, Madison Mathers, has this paper that just came out. And she's doing it in concert with her advisors. The community mentor was USGS's Brian Bergamaschi, and the research mentor, academic mentor was at UC Davis. It's Peter Hernus. And both of them are also previous awardees of our research awards. So it's a good highlight of a product that we've strongly supported. And so there's a graphic for this with POC, and you might think, POC, what is this? And I just want to be really clear. It's stuff in the water you can eat. So it's basically food for fish. There's so many different kinds of POC, but basically to be particulate means it's not dissolved. It's pieces of stuff floating in the water, sometimes called cestin or, sediments or solids, whatever you want to call it, but it's things in the water, and there's the organic carbon component of it that's so important to fish. The reason that we don't have better metrics of it is it's really hard to measure. It's very energetically driven. So for example, fast waters can carry lots of pieces of stuff in it and slow waters can't, right? So it's a pulsed thing that's hard to measure, and then particles all have different concentrations of organic carbon, whether they're coming, from example, from sediments up from uplands, or whether they're coming from wetlands that are closer to the delta, or even algae that are growing within the system. So it's hard to measure, but it's actually important, and we've known that for a while. But as the delta has changed, we've really cut off wetlands, we've cut off floodplains, we've cut off a lot of watershed sources of POC into the system through dams, reservoirs, and so on. The system has really moved down into having, less than a tenth of what its historical values probably would have been, this pool of particulate organic carbon. And so we know this because we've tracked this in the 1990s. Lots of work was done then it was showed again in 2000s, this continuous decline. And so here's now 2020 going back to look at distributions and concentrations of these different food particles in the water, and where they are and where they aren't. And so you might wonder, why do we care? Two reasons. One is the delta used to be a huge tidal wetland that was pumping out lots of POC. So we know the system historically probably had a lot in it. The second thing is another Delta Science Fellow was funded recently, Jen Harfman, and she had a major paper come out showing that the copepods, the zooplankton in the system, the base of our food chain into the fish, they actually prefer POC. They like it better than algae, and they grow faster, and they have higher survival. So we know it's an important part of the system. And so one of the questions is, what can we do to increase it? And what it looks like is our best chance of restoring the pelagic food web for fish in the Delta is through tidal restoration and connecting those food producing sites with channels to get the water pumped out. We know this is happening in the West in Grizzly Bay. We know we get lots of carbon inputs from Montezuma Slough, for example. On the east side, and the Mokelumne has big inputs that are from places like Sycamore Slough and Hog Slough. So we know it's an important part of the system. And one thing that USGS in particular wants to highlight, and they do in this paper, is that we need to not just focus on sites that make food, but also how they're hydrodynamically connected to the waters to bring that food out and they get into the food web. So this detrital component is obviously really important. Watersheds are not going to be reconnected very soon. We need our reservoirs. And so this internal source of food, this detrital import, is going to become more important. An interesting trade-off of having less and less particulates coming into the system is that you have less and less, if you will, turbidity and shading of the water, which allows algal blooms to grow. Some of them are good. Some of these are a win, but some of them are not. In the South Delta, harmful algal blooms are often tracked to, the increase in water clarity and the chance that they will lead to a bloom that's not ideal for the system. So towards that end, I wanted to highlight this paper just to put an attention on the role of hydrology in driving the food web in this system, and in terms of the detrital export and how important it is. And with tidal restoration as part of the Delta Plan, I think we can see also that there's multiple benefits to tidal restoration, even beyond the food that's being produced for fish. And that's why I highlighted this particular paper. And I'm happy to take any questions.
I guess to state the obvious, if there's less food, then there's less fish, and that's a problem, right? That's the kind of the interest in tracking the food.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
But thank you for pointing that out. Yes.
All right, any other members have questions on that from Marie? Nope. Okay.
Okay, great. Then let's move forward with some of the information items that we want to highlight. Before I launch into the first one on your list here, I want to point out that in March, the very first week of March, we had the Interagency Ecological Program workshop for 3 days downstairs in the CNRA building, and well attended, hugely important. Those recordings are online. Also, we had the first cyanobacterial harmful algal blooms workshop, which was called by the implementation strategy, and that was on March 6th. And this was the beginning of the implementation plan, and it's really the first step towards implementing the strategy. The first one you're going to see here in this on your staff report is the attendance of Dr. Shoko Shinbrat at the Environmental Data Summit. That was a pretty important event at NCEAS, the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, that we have partnership with. They focused on AI, so artificial intelligence, to improve conservation. And the event was widely attended by not just agency and academics, but also representatives from, somebody came from Washington, D.C., from an aide, which was impressive from the House of Representatives. The workshop's focus was on better using deep learning, machine learning, and also just harnessing the power of the public to get better data on conservation. So if you have the Merlin app on your phone for identifying birds, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about, coming out and giving people the opportunity to contribute to tracking of species in the Delta. And so, again, we learned a lot from Shoko's attendance there, and we can move forward on some ideas from that. Okay, an update on the social science extension specialist. We brought in 4 incredible candidates for this position, which would be expected to start in the summer. And the social scientists range from an economist to a governance specialist to an anthropologist to a political scientist, so real broad sense of backgrounds. And right now we're looking at bringing someone in this summer, and so hopefully that will be an announcement we can make soon. Okay, the next thing is to move on is on your radar is the State of the Bay Delta Science report for 2025, the focus is on extreme events. This is our flagship synthesis product, comes out every 2 years. We focused on extreme events this year. Just came out last week. It's going to be in 2 separate issues. So the March issue and then the September issue. And so this March issue has, and you can begin to read it now, and we'll be highlighting this at another council meeting. But the ones right now that are available are on governance challenges to deal with extreme events, I'm sorry. Heat waves as an extreme event and what their impacts are, and droughts, what their impacts are on Delta communities and resources here. And then in the September issue, we're expecting to have 3 papers. One is on atmospheric rivers, their effects on the Delta communities, and also wildfires and water quality impacts of those wildfires, again, on Delta resources and the communities. And then there's going to be a synthesis paper that pulls all these pieces together and really focus on a term that we use a lot now called non-stationarity, which means things are not the same. The cadence and the way things are changing is not, it's not your mom's Delta. The things have changed. So I think we need to understand how these things have changed. Okay. And then the other thing to put on your radar is we're going to have the last of our Delta Research Awards seminar series on May 7th. And this is going to focus on salmon. So there'll be 3 presenters who didn't present last year in our video series. The purpose of these videos is to connect these scientists with managers, with the public, open for questions, really targeted on making use of the science in practical ways rather than just publishing in, high profile journals. And so those 3 speakers will be Renee Henry from Trout Unlimited, talking about landscape scale, reorienting to recovery program. Russell Perry from USGS will be talking about the Chinook population predictions. And finally, I will focus on predator detection on juvenile salmon from Rebecca Buchanan. So that's coming up May 7th. And then just 2 days later, there will be a microplastics symposium at UC Davis in partnership with their Coastal Marine and Sciences Institute. All of the speakers are listed online. You need to be registered to attend, but it will be recorded, and you can also live stream it if you're interested in joining and participating in the conversation. That's an all-day event on May 9th. And the only other thing that I want to make sure is on people's radar is that the Independent Science Board applications are due next Monday, and we're looking at 3 replacements on the Independent Science Board, and those applications are due again on Monday, March 31st. And that is the pieces of data on your radar. Any questions before I move to by the numbers? All right, let's go ahead and take a look at what the weather has brought us here. I think what you're going to see is it looks a whole lot like it did in February, except the Sacramento River is down. It was crazy high a month ago. It's basically down about 25%, so into a reasonable level. It's not 229% anymore. The San Joaquin River actually has been boosted up, probably because some of the snow melts, so it's starting to pick up again, and the salinity has also dropped, so it seems to be doing well. And then from the diversions, they have also, they're basically about the same as they were before. You'll see that the salinity numbers are not reported here. It says not available. They just put it back online yesterday, so we got the numbers, and it's very similar in terms of, it's about 158 parts per million salinity, so it's pretty fresh. Those things are looking good from the exports. But I will say these are the data that we take from the Banks pumping station. But it was down. The salinity gauge was down for most of March, so that number is our best estimate of what we had for March. And then again, if you look at the snowpack, as you've heard in the news, we're nearly 100% of what we would expect at this time. All of the reservoirs are over what would be expected at this point in time. And we have another storm coming in this weekend, so we'll just see where that brings us. And that's all I have to report.
Councilmember Miller.
just in terms, thank you. This was always great. You do such a good job. Get closer to the mic. Okay. That was great. You do such a great job. In terms of the salinity measure, what happens when it's down? I mean, isn't that
Like a
Just-
fundamentally
yeah.
important, yeah. I don't know. I do know it was down for a large part of March, and I don't, there's other gauges out there, and I'm
Mhm.
sure that this is just the one that they report on CDEC, which is that single, they maybe have other gauges that they then average to give that number. So it's possible that it was being measured elsewhere. I don't know the answer to the question, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Could we maybe look into that, just because this idea of the salinity is so important for all of our work and to protect so much of the Delta? That would be great if there's a follow-up on that.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Yep. And that salinity number you're talking about is specific to the pumping stations.
Yes.
So it would be like Clifton, Court 4 Bay area.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
the joint, Banks is the federal pump, right?
Federal pump.
State.
State pump. Thank you so much, JP.
All right.
Jones would be the.
Yes,
federal
Member
pump.
Burgess.
So 2 questions. So related to salinity, it can have all kinds of impacts. It has impacts on how the water is processed for drinking water. It has impacts on agriculture as far as irrigation goes. It's also not great for certain ecosystems that are based on fresh water and those kind of things. So that's why it's an issue. But my question was, earlier this year, there was a large release of water as a reaction to the fires down south. I know you're not looking at specific storage of those things, but do you know, are they doing something to up their supply so that when we get towards the end of summer, there's plenty of water that we will be able to release at those times?
I don't know the answer to those stations.
All right. Yeah, I'm just curious. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Lisa Marie? Nope. Okay. Seeing none, thank you. Is that conclude your report?
And I conclude my report. Thank you,
Okay,
Shirley.
thank you. I'll ask for public comment on this item.
There's no public comment here in the Sacramento location. Council members in Gali, anyone at your location?
None here, thank you.
All right. And seeing as we're not going to take a lunch break today, I think we'll do a quick 10-minute break and come back at 11:10, and we'll start with our Delta Research Awards and Science Fellows agenda item then.
I'm here, right?
Okay, we're going to get started again. Concluded our 10-minute break, and we're coming back to agenda item number 10, the Delta Research Awards and Delta Science Fellows. I think Lisa Marie Wyndham Myers is going to do some introductions, and our panel will be Henry DeBay, our Deputy Executive Officer for Science, and Dylan Stern, our Program Manager, who is going to fix climate change.
And water rights, and the pelagic organism decline, yes.
Well, it is a pleasure to introduce Henry and Dylan because we have fabulous announcements to make today. And I think we'll start with Henry, who's our Deputy Executive Officer of Science, and then let Dylan feed in, and then I'll join in at some point, but we'll start with Henry.
Can you hear me? So thank you, Chair Lee, council members, great to see you. And we're very excited today to be able to talk to you about the 2025 Delta Research Awards and Delta Science Fellows. So if we could have the slide deck, please. And just a quick point of clarification, the Delta Science Fellows are different from the State Policy Fellows we just welcomed earlier. So we just want to keep everybody on their feet. That's why we're doing this. So just a reminder, this is an information item as the council approved the awarding of these funds for research previously. And in terms of our plan today for the presentation, I'll provide a bit of background. It's a different slide deck, yeah. I'll provide a bit of background on science funding in the Delta writ large, including the uniqueness of the Delta Science Program's role in that context. Dylan, as our science funding manager, will talk about the similarities and differences between the research awards and the Delta Science Fellows, including the processes of reviewing applications and selecting awards. Lisa Marie will share more details about the 16 awards that we ultimately landed on, and then Dylan will close us out with expected project deliverables, next steps, and upcoming opportunities for engagement. Any luck with the slide deck? There we go.
Yay.
Okay, so let's move forward to the next slide, or maybe 2 slides. Trying to build up the suspense. Great, that's it. So before talking about the awards, we thought it'd be helpful to zoom out and talk about science funding in the Delta more broadly. So first, there's a long history of science funding in the Delta, and a lot of that history has revolved around environmental monitoring. Monitoring being the routine collection of data in the same time and place to track changes in the environment. And this monitoring was largely brought on by requirements from the Clean Water and Endangered Species Acts in the 1970s. So fast forward to more recently, in fiscal year 2022, state and federal agencies spent a collective $143 million on science in the Delta. And if we separate that amount by state and federal contributions, the state carried 53% of those expenditures and the federal government carried 43%. Now we can also divide that same $143 million by the amounts that are spent for monitoring, which is required by permits and regulations, versus research and synthesis, which is typically more discretionary and focused on answering specific questions about environmental processes or human connections to the environment. And that split is 61% of the expenditures went toward monitoring, while 39% went to research and synthesis. And for context, $4 million for research funding is appropriated by the legislature to the council every year, which is actually less than 3% of this total $143 million. But because so much funding goes to monitoring, we have an outsized impact, relatively speaking, on research and synthesis funding. And I'll say a little bit more about why that is in the next slide. So next slide, please. So firstly, in terms of why we fund research, it comes from the Delta Reform Act. The Reform Act charges the Delta Science Program with funding research in order to provide the best possible science to inform water and environmental decision-making in the Delta. In terms of what we fund, we largely target research funding where the community has identified a need, which is what the Science Action Agenda is all about, a community-developed list of research priorities. And we also see ourselves as a backstop for research funding, where and when it's needed, when other funders can't, which is why we often refer to our research funding as targeting the gaps and glue in the system. In terms of how we fund, we administer those funds largely through competitive solicitations. In other words, we put out a call with some criteria, and the community submits project ideas responsive to that call. And Dylan will talk more about this process shortly. Last but not least, partnerships are really key to growing the pot of money available for these solicitations, and we're especially grateful to the state water contractors for partnering with us on this solicitation. And Darcy Austin, the science program manager for the state water contractors, is here with us today, and Darcy's actually an alum of the Delta Science Program, so we're excited to have her. And I believe she will be commenting after this agenda item. We're also grateful to California Sea Grant, a NOAA program, for supporting us in getting proposals independently reviewed and administered, a service that they provide to other state agencies like the Ocean Protection Council. And I don't think we have anybody in the room from California Sea Grant, but they may be tuning in online. So a big thanks to California Sea Grant. Next slide. Excuse me. Must have been the POC I had for breakfast. I just had cereal, I'm kidding. Okay, so before talking about the new projects, I do want to just take a minute to talk about what success looks like for the science program when it comes to funding research, using a couple examples shown here. The first from 2016, dubbed Operation Baseline, set out to investigate how the improvement to the Echo Water wastewater treatment plant in Elk Grove would affect water quality and the broader Delta ecosystem. And what the study did is establish a baseline of water quality, sediment, and phytoplankton before Echo Water went online and afterward. And why the research was successful is because of several things. It showed the Echo Water project improved water quality coming out of the plant. That said, contrary to what was hypothesized, the Echo Water project didn't actually show a ripple effect on water quality in the food web throughout the Delta, but disproving hypotheses is helpful too. And this finding has in turn shaped additional research on water quality. This project also revolutionized nutrient monitoring in the system by developing a rapid approach to mapping water quality across the Delta using fast boats and flow-through sensors is what they're called on those boats. And it was also a multi-institution undertaking, which is another measure of success in our view, involving the Central Valley Water Quality Control Board, U.S. Geological Survey, the San Francisco Estuary Institute, or SFEI, San Francisco State University, and Cal Maritime Academy. The second project dates back to 2020, when DSP provided funding to researchers at NOAA and UC Davis to look at the sudden onset of behavior abnormalities in baby salmon born in Delta tributaries. And basically, to make a long story short, the issue was traced to changes in food availability in the ocean for adult salmon. Adult salmon were eating a less diverse and more anchovy-rich diet due to changes in the ocean, which caused a vitamin deficiency issue, vitamin B1 specifically, or thiamine, which they were then passing on to their offspring, resulting in baby salmon that couldn't swim. Not good. So the study found that this issue could be circumvented if the salmon eggs were simply incubated in a thiamine bath. And a key metric of success for us for this funded research is that it ultimately informed changes to salmon hatchery management practices, and the issue has since subsided. Another metric of success of the project is that it employed a number of early career researchers at UC Davis, so graduate students and postdocs. Now, these are just a couple project success snapshots, and there are different ways to characterize success of funded research, but ensuring that return on investment from the science we fund is really essential to the program. In fact, Dr. Ash Zemanek, a senior environmental scientist with the Delta Science Program, has developed a framework assessing the impact of our funded research so that we can evaluate success more tangibly and comprehensively across our program. And Ash will likely present to the council later in the year on this topic. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dylan.
And I just want to shout out Dylan, who was instrumental in pulling off the Operation Baseline funding and project. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thanks for giving it the name Operation Baseline. That was genius. Okay. Hello. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. I also wanted to confirm that we do have Dr. Lian Guo online from California Sea Grant, in case there are any questions that come up. And she's the supervising research program supervisor. So welcome. Next slide, please. So I just want to be super clear that we are talking about two different programs today, which actually does not include the Delta policy state fellows that we've talked about a lot today. So we have the Delta Research Awards and we have the Delta Science Fellows. And so the Delta Research Awards, we typically have larger projects that apply that are interdisciplinary teams, funding up to $1.5 million projects that last about 3 years long. For this solicitation, we feel it's pretty unique that we're encouraging co-production or involving the folks who are affected by the research from the start of the research to help shape it and participate throughout. So we're really proud about that. We also we're encouraging social science with extra points during the scoring process. And then in comparison, we have the Delta Science Fellows fellowships, which are geared toward early career researchers. And these are master's or PhD students or postdocs. And they are paired up with both a research mentor and a community mentor to help shape their 1 to 2 year projects. This slide here shows the incredible demand for these programs, which far outweighs the resources that we actually have. For the Delta Research Awards, you can see we received 66 applications requesting over $60 million. We were able to combine our $4 million annual research budget over a few different fiscal years. And so the council itself is able to fund 8 projects totaling almost $6 million. And then, as Henry said earlier, the state water contractors are contributing for 2 additional projects. And that brings our total to $7.8 million. Very excited about that. And then the Delta Science Fellows, you can see we received 23 applications requesting $4.4 million. And after the review process, we were able to award 6 fellowships totaling about $1 million. Okay, and then in terms of our little graphic here for the funding process, we have a very rigorous process that's been fine-tuned over the years. And so we've distilled it down into 5 key steps. So first, there's the call for proposals, which must be, the proposals always must be responsive to the science action agenda, as well as other criteria that we have, like scientific merit, qualifications of the team, feasibility of the work, and broader impacts and equitable engagement. And then we have a panel of renowned experts led by the Delta lead scientist who evaluates the proposals. For the Delta Research Awards, they specifically receive an extra round of review by highly specialized subject matter experts. And then to arrive at the final list of awards, the Delta lead scientist and council staff balance the scores and the input from the review panel and sort of have to balance across the distribution across the science action agenda, the management relevance, the budgets, of course, and then the variety of applicant institutions and different career stages. And throughout the whole process, California Sea Grant supports us to ensure a robust, fair, and neutral solicitation process. So now let's take a look at the actual awards themselves. So I'll hand it over to Dr. Lisa Marie Windham-Myers.
Thanks, Dylan. Okay, drum roll, please. And welcome to our next crop of research projects and fellows. You're going to see a graphic now that looks complicated, but it's going to show you the broad, next slide, please, thank you. It'll show you the broad geographic and topical range and distribution in a snapshot of all 16 of these awards and how they relate to management needs that we've identified. That's in the column on the left. Just so you know too, the boxes with white around them are Delta Research Awards, and the black boxes are the Delta Science Fellows. This is an amazing package of projects and fellows that all rated very high through the independent reviews. They all also helped address these 6 management needs that are identified in our science action agenda, including everything from promoting innovative monitoring approaches to addressing climate uncertainties. And that's what the color coding signifies, again, in those boxes in the map. They also integrate different knowledge frameworks from biophysical sciences to social sciences to traditional ecological knowledge. And a number of the projects explicitly incorporate the co-production of research with tribes, community, scientists, and students. And that was an explicit goal of this solicitation, and it's denoted here with the 3 little humans icon in the box. And then also there's a brief caption in each box that highlights the key research questions that the projects are addressing. One important thing that we're not highlighting here is that there's many letters of support that help make the case for how important these projects are. And they were contributed by community organizations, federal agencies, tribes, non-governmental organizations. And they really helped, again, show the connection of these projects with actual needs. And a brief caption in each of these boxes is just to highlight what the key research questions are of these projects.
Can I interrupt you for a minute?
What's that?
Can I interrupt you for
You sure
a minute?
can.
I love this slide. Like, this is my favorite slide in the whole world that I've ever seen, honestly. I mean, it just tells like such a great story with the way that you guys did the color coding and the geographic pointing at the arrows and everything in the boxes. It's perfect. That's all.
We'll frame it and get you a copy.
Great. But it shows where research is happening. It's not all just focused in the Delta. It's even downstream, dealing with exports. It's upstream in the greater watershed. So there's a nice broad range of projects here. And we also want to highlight that while we're excited about these projects, there were many other highly rated projects that we were not able to fund. We just simply didn't have the dollars to do it. But they were excellent projects. And then there's more information on each of these individual projects in your staff report, and you can ask us anytime for more. Okay, so next slide, we'll get off the pretty slide. And we're just going to highlight 3 of the projects, just to give you a little bit of a sense of the scope of these individual projects. The first 2 are Delta Research Awards, and the last one is the Delta Science Fellow. So the first one's touching on restoration. It's led by Dr. April Robinson at the San Francisco Estuary Institute in collaboration with experts from the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians and the Colfax Todd's Valley Consolidated Tribe. They are looking at ecological and cultural benefits of Tule reed burning, tending, and gathering for promoting restoration and more equitable management in the Delta. This is a project that you may likely remember because it was brought up at the Council's Tribal Listening Session in 2023. The second one focuses on water quality and accelerating our ability to monitor harmful algal blooms. Dr. Holly Bowers from Coastal Conservation and Research Incorporated is leading this project with partners from Environmental Science Associates, Restore the Delta, and the San Francisco Estuary Institute. They seek to make the monitoring of harmful algal blooms more quantitative and also incorporate toxicity. Right now, the way HABs are monitored from the community is to use this MVI or Microcystis Visual Index. Those are the 3 boxes at the top. And they, in the middle of the slide, I should say, at the top. And this reporting is already operational, so it's useful, but it's subject to quite a bit of error and limited use for interpreting impact. This project will make HABs monitoring more quantitative, accurate, and helpful for predicting HABs occurrences and impacts, as well as expanding an easy-to-use portable app approach for reporting HABs by the community. So you'll be able to do it on your phone. The third project that we're highlighting here is led by is on fish, and it's led by Dr. Shaheenur Islam, and is supported by mentors at UC Davis and Department of Water Resources. He'll be advancing an approach for tracking presence and health of endangered species using what's called environmental RNA. It's like eDNA you've heard of, but eRNA lasts a shorter time in the water. So it's a more real-time metric of who's there now. And so traditionally, if you wanted to know that, you'd have to pull a net and then pull the fish out and count them and ID the species. But in this case, you just go collect a water sample from the Delta, bring it back to the lab, and then analyze the genetic material present. And that's what the little candy wrappers that are in the river are supposed to represent. And this is a new technique that's exciting, but it really does, and it does offer efficiencies, but it also needs refinement to ensure accuracy. So before we can really operationalize this, we need to prove it works. And then these are just some examples of the valuable projects that have been selected. And I'll turn to Dylan Stern to close out the announcement.
Next slide, please. So going beyond the peppermint candies and the water, and these really high priority projects that we're extremely excited about that are going to inform decision-making in the Delta. So you might be asking, what are the actual tangible benefits and outcomes that we can expect from the research? And the answer is that we have a really high expectations for these awards to produce high impact products, also known as deliverables, right? And some of those are highlighted here, just a small portion of the full list. And they are grouped by what is required by all projects in the middle there, the little flower diagram. And then also some more specific project deliverables. So for all projects, they have standard deliverables for reporting, presentations at conferences, including the Bay Delta Science Conference, manuscripts, communication products. They will all be required to enter their project into the Delta Science Tracker. And then we also have data management plans that we require and engagement and communication plans. And then just to put a point on that, all data that's generated from the awards are required to be made publicly accessible, except when otherwise prohibited, such as human subject data or tribal data. When it comes to open data and open science, the council goes above and beyond what's actually required by California law. And so we also strongly encourage the use of open model repositories like GitHub to actually publish model code as well. And since these all projects will be using the Delta Science Tracker, that'll be a one-stop shop to be able to find where all the data is located for these projects. So here we also have some other examples of deliverables that we expect. So for decision makers, for example, we'll be expecting a policy brief on the impacts of flow management on sturgeon migration. For the public, we expect to see multiple public workshops and seminars. And then for scientists, obviously publications, but also we're expecting toolkits like the one that Lisa Marie mentioned earlier, the novel environmental RNA method to monitor longfin and delta smelt. And then I also wanted to mention that the council is going to be organizing a legislative briefing on these projects pretty soon as well. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, we don't have time to list all the names or talk about all of the amazing individuals, all 76 of them involved in the research, but wanted to take a moment to share their faces here. They are organized on the slide by, I guess it's kind of hard to tell, but the blue boxes are showing Delta Research Award teams, and the green boxes are showing the Delta Science Fellow teams, including their community and research mentors. And these are just the researchers. A lot happens behind the scenes, and I would love to acknowledge some of the contributions of others who were involved in this. So to start, our colleagues at the Delta Science Program, Megan Nguyen, Vivian Sue, Maggie Chrisman, George Isaac, Ash Zemanik, Kim Luke, and of course, so many more, and the council at large. And then from California Sea Grant, I'd love to acknowledge the director, Shauna Oh, the research program supervisor, Leon Gua, who's here on Zoom again, and Delaney Medina, Herminia Robles, and then also the tons and tons of subject matter experts who were vital for the success of our review process. And then, of course, Darcy Austin, who's here, and the state water contractors for their continued collaboration and funding and implementation of the Science Action Agenda. Next slide, please. So next steps. Finally, I just will want to wrap up with some next steps for Delta Research. This timeline we have separated by Delta Science Fellowships above and then Delta Research Awards below. And so first of all, the Delta Science Fellowships started in February. And then in April or May, the Delta Research Awards are slated to begin. And then May is going to be an extremely busy month with an early career leadership workshop for the fellows. And keep an eye out. We have Lisa Marie mentioned this actually earlier. There's a seminar that's featuring research from the 2021 Delta Research Awards. And we're very excited for that. And that's a great opportunity for council member and everyone in the public to engage with these research projects. And then later in May, the Delta Research Awards will hold its kickoff meeting. Next slide. So that's it. So on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for your time and your commitment to science. And now we'd be happy to answer any questions. If you wouldn't mind going back a slide. That's our extra slide. You're not supposed to see that.
Wait, show it again.
Councilmember Burgess.
Yeah, Henry, going back to one of the first slides, you were talking about federal versus state versus contractors. And then you said something, and then you showed how a significant amount of it is on monitoring. And then you said monitoring required for permitting. And so the question I have is, a lot of this monitoring, and I'm sure Jay will bring something up related to monitoring as well, is if it's required for permitting and we have some of the federal funding decreasing, is that federally required for permitting?
I thought there might be a gotcha question.
Sorry, I'm
No,
good
no,
for
I'm
that.
kidding. That's a tough
Okay.
one to speak to.
All right.
I mean, the monitoring is required under, these key acts and key permits, and what the federal government continues to do, I think, is a question.
Yeah, I don't want to put you in that position. I'll just say that I am concerned that there is less interest in supporting science. And I think that's very dangerous, because in order for us to be able to solve problems, we need to understand the conditions that we're dealing with. In order to solve problems that have emerged, we need to be able to monitor and test theories and figure out how to fix it. So I'm just really grateful that there are folks that are choosing careers and choosing to be curious and are going to continue supporting the scientific method to, be curious and to answer those questions. And I think the other part of this is trust. If people aren't getting real information, and we're seeing it already, if someone just says something and there's no proof there, and we're not holding people accountable to have that proof, that's also dangerous. So again, to all of those 76 people and all those people that support those 76 people and all of those people that support programs like this, please keep going. And for the state, if we have to make extra, support, we need to also do that. So I'm just really grateful to everybody that's doing this work, and I look forward to seeing the outcomes. And I'm actually curious to see the 21 outcomes, because 2021 outcomes, because there's this big fanfare and ooh, we're going to do this, and then the results that should be celebrated as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for those comments. And just to add on top of that, so, a lot of this has been a little bit start and stop. There was reporting a couple months ago that some federal contracts to maintain the Delta smelt culturing labs at UC Davis were not going to be renewed. And so there was some scrambling on the state side to try to fill that gap. Not us on the state side, but other state agencies. Since then, it sounds like the federal government has reversed course, and they're actually going to extend the contracts or renew the contracts. So, like I said, a lot of start stop. But I will also say, in general, this state agencies, including ourselves, are watching this carefully and realize the importance of programs, as you just mentioned, and are trying to step in and fill the void to the extent possible. But that does mean we just get stretched thinner in some cases without new funding.
And let me add, it's important to know what we're dealing with and all of that, but financially, when we're investing in all these different things, whether, it actually financially makes sense for us to do this work as well. It's efficient. So sorry, I'm using a little bit of a soapbox, but I appreciate what we're doing, and I encourage folks to keep going.
Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
that.
Councilmember Zingali.
Thank you, and I appreciate your comments, Diane. They certainly resonate. Thank you all for executing a thorough and inclusive, solid process, and for having them merge these really exciting projects. I was thinking about what you said, Lisa Marie, about there being other really great proposals that you weren't able to fund. And I was just wondering, what can we say about how the award levels have gone down in the last 3 cycles? I see in 2019, it was close to 17 million. And then the next one was almost 10, now 7.8. So we went from funding 26 projects to 10. Is that something beyond our control? And a related question, kind of a sub question, is I'm kind of hoping and assuming that the funding for the Science Fellows portion of it has not gone down concurrently, but just anything you can say to illuminate that, please.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Zingali. I have to turn that to Dylan and
I can,
Henry.
I can speak
There we
to
go,
it.
JP.
I've been here a while. When we had 17 million, that was still, we had proposition funding. So there was a time when I can't remember which, was it 50 or one that there was an allocation for Delta Science in that bond. So we were able to add that to the general fund money that we had. And then also in the past, our partners at the Bureau of Reclamation have at times been able to come in and contribute to our pot. That was unfortunately unable to happen this time, but we're hopeful that it can resume in the future. So any help that the council can give us in the future to figuring out ways that we can grow this pot, we'd be gracious for that.
So can we take from what you just said, Jessica, that our level, our contribution to it has remained fairly steady?
Yes, and I think in fact grown slightly over time.
Thank you.
It's definitely grown in recent years. Council's predecessor, CalFed, was largely prop funded and was on a whole different scale. And when the council was created, it became general funded, and over time through BCPs, we've been able to grow the pot to $4 million annually for research. And just quick response on the fellows. The fellows are kind of a different piece. A lot of the fellows are UC based, and with the salary increases in the UC system for graduate students, that has basically meant that fellows cost more, which means we can't fund as many. So that's a good thing for the graduate students, but that just means that makes the package smaller.
Do we have a total on how much it would take to fund the whole science action agenda?
I love that question. Lisa Marie's predecessor, and Lisa Marie, you should do this too, but Lisa Marie's predecessor, Laurel Larson, tried to calculate that and she took the 2022 to 2026 science action agenda, all the science actions in there, and using two different methodologies, tried to figure out how much that would cost. And what she landed on was a range, basically $80 to $90 million of funding would be required to fully implement the SAA. Again, reminding everybody of the $143 million that's spent on science every year. And when you think about the science action agenda, that's 80 to 90 million over the course of 5 years, because it's a 5-year document. So the annual amount is somewhere in the range of 16 to 18 million. So we're a little ways off, but we're not super far off either. And so I think this goes to the point of efforts that we can undertake to grow funding for research in the Delta would be great.
One of the things that we're going to talk about at the upcoming DPIC meeting is the Prop 4 funds, and try to kind of highlight what the gaps are in the Delta with some of the needs that we have. And so I think this kind of falls into that category for departments and agencies that are receiving those funds that may not have them allocated to anything in particular. We kind of want to highlight where the gaps are in the Delta to try to direct some of that unallocated funding to some of the things that we're doing. So that's great. Any other questions for Dylan? All right. Yeah, that was a great presentation. Fantastic. Do we have any public comments on this item?
None here in Sacramento, Madam Chair. Councilmember Zingali?
None in Eureka.
Back.
Fantastic. Oh, I'm so sorry. We did get a blue card. You're so right. Darcy Austin here at the Sacramento location.
So fancy. I do not like standing up here, but that's okay. My name's Darcy Austin. I'm the science manager for the State Water Contractors. And the State Water Contractors is an association of public water agencies, 27 of them that rely on water coming from the State Water Project. State Water Project, of course, provides water supply for 25 million Californians throughout the state, and then also supply for 750,000 acres of agricultural land. We have a small science program. You've already heard about it, small relative to the Delta Science program. We have about $2 million every year that we invest in science projects, research, tools. We have a set of objectives that we like to kind of nest under the science action agenda. We like that as an umbrella function and process and document. So we fund things with ranges from tools like eDNA, we have invested quite a bit in, habitat and ecology. Sometimes it's non-operational stressors, so things like contaminants, as well as we like to provide science development. So sometimes that will be things like symposia, science symposium. And I'm just here to say that we appreciate the work that the Delta Science Program puts into this. You've already heard so much about this today. And I appreciate the work that the Delta Stewardship Council does in supporting this work as well. This process is so well designed, it's so well thought out, and it's very, very robust. And it's more than we could do on our own. So we benefit from being able to take these projects once the process is over and say, hey, yes, this aligns with our objectives, and we would like to fund certain projects. This year we kind of did a little bit of a horse trade. We usually do both the Delta Research Awards and Research Fellows, but we ended up doing 2 of the Research Awards and none of the Fellows, and that just happened to be the priorities based on our objectives. So again, we're just very happy for this process. We've already taken those studies to our board. They have agreed to fund those, and we're in the contracting process already. So we'll work with the Delta Science Program on kind of aligning that with the next steps for this program. And then the last thing I wrote down is that we would support additional funding for science in this community. I think our budget is going to be set at $2 million. I don't see that moving up. I mean, it's substantial for the science program that we have. And obviously, the Delta Science Program takes the lead in this organized science program funding. But any way that we can help get more science funding into our system, we would definitely do. And with that, that concludes my remarks. Thank you so much, Delta Science Program, and thank you, Stewardship Council.
Well, thank you for your partnership. We really appreciate it. All right. Any other public comments, Beck?
Now, no further public comments.
No, okay.
Thank you.
And none for Daniel.
None
correct?
here.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. Next up, we have a presentation by the Department of Water Resources on the proposed West Falls River Salinity Barrier Project. So I'll welcome up Jeff Henderson, who is our Deputy Executive Officer for Planning and Performance, and he will introduce the panel.
Thank you. Good afternoon, council members. I'm pleased to introduce this item for your consideration. I just need to get closer to it. Good afternoon, council members. I'm pleased to introduce this item for your consideration. The Delta is influenced by twice daily tides that bring salt water into Delta waterways. Outflow from the rivers entering the Delta keeps salt water from degrading water quality for local municipal supplies, Delta agriculture, and the environment, in addition to water supplies exported from the Delta. Delta outflow is managed by reservoir releases and other strategies to keep saltwater at bay, and these strategies become less reliable during extended droughts. And due to such droughts, DWR took emergency action in 1977, 2015, and 2021 to preserve water quality by constructing emergency rock drought barriers. These barriers prevented high salinity water from entering the central Delta. With severe droughts occurring more frequently, DWR is currently proposing a process to proactively deploy the next drought salinity barrier if it's needed. DWR is requested to provide the council today with an update on the planning and implementation of what's known as the proposed West Falls River Salinity Barrier Project. This project is a potential covered action, and our understanding is that DWR plans to file a certification of consistency with the Delta Plan in coming weeks. So now I'd like to welcome Ibrahim Al-Sufi, the Senior Water Resources Engineer from DWR, who will present the update today.
Can you hear me okay? Great. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, I'll bring it a little closer. Is that better? Okay. Well, thank you for introducing me, Jeff. I feel like there's not much left to say. Good afternoon, members of the council and everyone here. My name is Ibrahim Al-Sufi. I'm going to move this a little closer. There we go. I'm a senior engineer with the California Department of Water Resources. I'm also the project manager for the West Falls River Drought Salinity Barrier Project. That's what I'll be speaking to today, provide you with a brief overview of the project, and really I'd like to demonstrate how the project does help protect the Delta ecosystem and ensure water supply reliability in the Delta. If you could go to the next slide, please. So in this presentation, it's relatively brief, but I'd like to just start with some considerations for the Delta Stewardship Council. Just talk briefly on the uniqueness of this project, and also just the really how vital the Delta is as a resource. I'll provide you with a brief overview of the project. The project does have some history, as Jeff alluded to, so I'd like to provide you with some of that background. Get a little bit into the details of how the Delta hydrology works. I think it's pretty fascinating, personally. Contrast a wet year versus a dry year. Touch briefly on some of the project details before summarizing all that information and speaking to some of our next steps, and hopefully leave ample time for some questions and discussion. Next slide, please. And so before getting into the proposed project, I think it's worth taking a moment really to speak to the Delta broadly, and just, again, how vital of a resource it is. In fact, I do think the Delta Stewardship Council recognizes this in drafting the Delta Plan and drafting the co-equal goals of protecting the ecosystem and ensuring water supply reliability. I think it's quite a remarkable place. If you just look at the map here, you see I would have liked to contrast the colors a little bit more, but there's just this this labyrinth of waterways that interconnect the Delta. I'd like to imagine that this is fresh water that we're looking at, and in a water year like this, or in a wet year, indeed it is. You have an abundance of fresh water that goes into the Delta that benefits quite a large amount of people and species, starting with fish that swim through the riverines. You have agricultural farmers that grow our foods that you and I eat. You have the state and federal water projects that provide water to millions of Californians across the state. And maybe not thought about as much, but you also have in Delta municipalities like the Contra Costa Water District, who is directly protected by salinity, our barrier that protects from salinity intrusion in the Delta. And so I do think it's important to recognize that when we have water, the system works great. You have this natural hydraulic barrier that prevents salinity from intruding into the Delta. I'm sure many of us are familiar that the Delta is tidally susceptible, meaning that during flood tide, you have water intruding in from the Pacific Ocean. What's repelling that salty water from coming in are these inflows. That's a combination of reservoir releases. That's a combination of snow that's melting from our mountains. And so you have this system that works pretty great in protecting and safeguarding our beneficial uses. It's really when we don't have the water that the system starts to break down. And when you're in drought and you don't have ample water supplies, salt water starts to intrude into the Delta, and it really does start to impact and can be quite consequential if we allow for salinity to intrude and impact all these beneficial uses. And so, that being said, our proposed project is to have the ability to construct a temporary rock salinity barrier in the West Falls River over the course of the next 10 years, starting in 2026. I think it's important to emphasize that it'd only be constructed during dry hydrologic years. So it's really not a project that we like to build, but it is effective when it's needed. And just given the cyclical nature of drought in California, and unfortunately due to climate change, we're seeing drought return both more frequently and more intensely. And so it's not necessarily a matter of if the barrier will be needed in the future, it really is a matter of when. And what's unique about this project and our certification that we plan to submit is that we're doing it in advance of the need. We don't necessarily know when we will need to install it, but we'd like to be proactive in our approach versus some of our previous emergency responses. And so that being said, we're planning for the worst and hoping for the best. Next slide, please. So again, the need for this project really stems from the need to maintain our fresh water supplies in the Delta. And I think there's a need to conserve water generally every year. I think our water supplies are really precious, but that need becomes increasingly important when we are in drought and there is just less water to go around. And that's when delta inflow, those combination of flows that help repel salinity is insufficient during drought years. And so what ends up happening is that saltwater starts to intrude in the delta, and that's what stems the need of this barrier to help prevent that. And again, there is also a need for generally as a state and as a department who manages water supplies to be proactive in our approach. When you get ahead of drought, it costs the state a lot less. You protect the beneficial uses of the delta, and it's just a lot more effective to be proactive versus some of our previous emergency drought responses. And so the whole purpose of the project is to protect the Central Delta's water quality for agricultural needs, for habitat and water supply to over 27 million Californians. Simultaneously, there is also a need to preserve our upstream reservoir storage for public health and safety needs. That becomes increasingly important when you just have less water to go around. And the scope of the project is, again, it's to have the ability to install the barrier over the course of the next 10 years. It'd be to be able to install the barrier up to 2 times within that 10-year period. And construction would begin no sooner than April 1st. It'd likely take about a month just to hydraulically close and finish construction. And the barrier would be removed either by November 30th of that year, and I'd hope conditions would get better to where we can remove it. But if drought does persist, we would have the ability to leave the barrier in place the following year should drought conditions persist. Next slide, please. And so West Falls River, if you're not familiar with the region, it is located in the Central Delta, and it's located in Contra Costa County. It wasn't really coincidental how we came about this location. In fact, there was a lot of modeling that went into investigating what potential sites could be effective in managing salinity intrusion. West Falls River proved to be the most consistent and effective location to manage and repel salinity, protect the delta from salinity intrusion across various different hydrologic conditions. And I'll explain why. If you could advance the image, I'm hoping my animation works. Okay, cool. Thank you. So essentially, why West Falls River is important. If you imagine that red star on the map as the West Falls River, essentially West Falls River is a direct connection from that would allow salt water to intrude into Frank's Tract. And why that's significant is because typically we speak about Frank's Tract as being the central hub of the delta. So it's a place where essentially a lot of the water that goes into the delta touches. It's a lot of our fresh water supply gets into Frank's Tract, and the idea is to protect Frank's Tract from getting contaminated to begin with so that we don't have this intermixing of very salty water. And so essentially by plugging West Falls River, you are redirecting the flood tidal flows up into the San Joaquin River and even the Sacramento River, both of which have a much higher capacity to dilute the water, the salty water, and more importantly, you're keeping Frank's Tract fresher for longer. All right, next slide, please. And so if you've lived in California long enough, you've probably recognized that we do have this cyclical nature. California has a cyclical nature of drought, it has a history of drought. In fact, if you've lived here long enough, you probably have lived through one or maybe even all 3 of these most recently listed drought periods. To me, what's most telling is if you look at the numbers, we've experienced 11 drought years within just a 15-year period. And just shifting your attention away to that table on the right, I think the thing to pay, these are the water year classifications for the Sacramento and San Joaquin Valley basins. posted publicly on Bulletin 120, but really the key takeaway is the colored rows. Those are the years that we've experienced either a dry year or a critically dry year, and generally there's a lot more colored rows than there are non-colored rows. So that's suggesting that, the data is suggesting that it's really not far-fetched to think that within the next 10 years, we will be back in drought. Hence, warranting the need to potentially install this barrier in the future. And I'd also like to just speak to some of the past barrier installations. There have been 2 previous instances of a salinity barrier in the West Falls River. The difference between what was done then, the first time at West Falls River being in 2015 and the second most recently in 2021, both of those were in response to drought conditions, albeit they were also in response to emergency governor proclamation orders. And so the key difference in what we're proposing to do today is to be more proactive, and the future barriers would not rely on these emergency proclamations. We're in the current process of getting all our permits to allow us to install a barrier in the future, should there be a need. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to take a step back to understand how this barrier works, I think it's worth going through how the delta works generally. I did speak to this briefly, but this is a bit more in depth. And so looking at the map, you see the blue arrow, and that's indicating that about 80% of the flow that goes into the delta comes from the north, generally the Sacramento River. And this, during a wet year, you have enough water coming from delta inflow that is repelling salinity from intruding into the delta twice a day, every day. And it's keeping it at bay. It's keeping the fresh water in the delta, which, as a result, this natural hydraulic barrier, it helps safeguard the beneficial uses of water in the delta. That's uses for water delivery. You have agricultural use, you have municipal, even domestic and industrial use within the delta. You're also protecting its water quality from getting contaminated by salts, and allowing the species to thrive in its aquatic habitat. So this is happening when we have a nice wet year and we have enough water in the system to repel salinity. The system does provide fresh water to in-delta water districts. I mentioned previously Contra Costa. That one I think is important to note because they happen to have an intake just on the other side of our barrier. And so they happen to be in a position that directly benefits from Frank's Tract not getting contaminated during times of drought. Next slide, please. So to contrast all that, when you are in drought and you do have reduced flow, you have this condition where there's just not enough fresh water to repel the salty water. And as a result, gradually over time, the delta gets contaminated with salt. And it's really a condition that cannot get reversed until we have ample flow, flood flows generally, to wash out the system. There are definitely significant impacts of having high salinity in the delta. That includes all those in-delta water users and their municipal and irrigation water supplies. It reduces the amount of fresh water available for downstream communities that rely on the water source. And it also creates a human rights to water challenge for communities that may not have access to alternative water supplies. Next slide, please. So I really like this conceptual image. It's essentially showing you a dry versus a wet year in one snapshot, with blue colors representing fresh water and red colors representing salty water. And so if I shift your attention to the left side of the image, you can see that in a wet year, you have ample inflow and you have enough water to repel salinity, and it's keeping it at bay. You could see there's a little bit of red on the left side of the image. That's about your Sassoon Marsh area, and I think that's generally where we like to keep salinity. Now, we don't necessarily have that choice when you're in drought. You don't have enough inflow, and as a result, if you look on the right side of the image, the central and south delta are very red, and this is essentially what happens when we don't have enough water in the system and salinity intrudes. Thus, it's a condition that really can't get reversed during drought and affecting the in-delta beneficial uses. Next slide, please. So perhaps unlike most projects, we do have the benefit of learning from previous occurrences of a barrier being installed at West Falls River. In the past, the emergency drought barriers helped maintain that north to south freshwater corridor and safeguard its beneficial uses for the in-delta water users. It also withstood saltwater intrusion into Frank's Tract, which is extremely important. And it allowed the State Water Project and Central Valley Project to operate while protecting water quality in the Central Delta. And it also maintained some the reservoir's cold water pools to allow for fish during critical needs, which I think most of us know during drought, it becomes really, really difficult for species in those types of conditions. And again, a very neat illustration. If you look at the image here on the top left corner, that's the image A. The colors represent the same thing. So blue is freshwater, red is salty water. If you look at that image, this is the scenario that if you are in drought and you don't have a barrier, during flood tide, you have salt water intruding into the delta, and as a result, Frank's Tract becomes relatively salty. It's really the image right below that, a letter B, that is more telling. During ebb tide, where you would expect salinity to retreat back towards the ocean, Frank's Tract is actually staying salty. And so that's that contamination condition that I was speaking to that you essentially want to prevent in the first place to allow fresh water in the delta for a longer period. And so if I shift your attention to letter C in the top right, those two black parallel lines are depicting the barrier being in place. And what's happening is that you are redirecting the salt water and flood tide into the San Joaquin and Sacramento River at an image here, both of which have much higher capacities to dilute that salty water. And more importantly, Frank's Tract is blue, meaning it's fresh. And predictably during ebb tide, on the very bottom right corner, Frank's Tract during ebb tide also remains fresh. Next slide, please. And I am just about wrapping up, so I appreciate your guys' patience. So just to summarize everything, the proposed project is consistent with the co-equal goals for protecting the Delta's ecosystem and ensuring water supply reliability. Again, it's really important for me to emphasize the barrier would only be installed during drought conditions if there warrants a need. In fact, I would like there to not be a need and for there to be enough water in the system. But again, we saw the history and it's pretty likely that we will be in drought again. So what we're seeking here is we're seeking to be proactive and adaptively manage salinity intrusion around the delta in response to climate change. We'd also like to increase the delta's, this project increases the delta's resiliency from the effects of climate change by protecting water quality, water delivery, and the aquatic habitat in the region. It also strengthens our ability to rebound from these interannual variabilities and compounding impacts of multi-year droughts and protecting the beneficial uses of that water. And lastly, a barrier in West Falls River has proven effective in protecting water quality and upstream preservation during times of drought. And very briefly, our next steps here are to submit our certification of consistency documents. We're expecting that by April we'll be ready to do so. Based on our current hydrologic conditions, the soonest we anticipate the barrier would be needed is April 26th. I say that very skeptically because I think following a very dry January, February, and March have proven to provide us with some decent amount of rain and snow, and so I hope that date can get pushed out. Next slide, please. And that's it. There's some contact information. My boss is Robert Trang, his boss is Jacob, and feel free to reach out to any one of us if you guys have questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we get started on questions from the members, I just want to remind folks that this will be coming to us as a covered action, and if it's appealed, we will be hearing it. And so we want to make sure that our comments are, factually based questions, but maintaining our neutrality on the project, just so that if we do end up getting it appealed, we want to make sure that we haven't done anything improper. So I see Daniel has his hand up, so let's start off with Daniel Zingali.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Ibrahim. That was very informative. I particularly appreciate your acknowledgement of the water flow being the preferred defense against salinity, but that isn't something we can always count on. I was wondering if this project will have any impact on non-native invasive species. Is there anything we should know about that?
I think it's a good question. It's actually something we're actively looking into. We are in the process of getting our permits with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. As a result, you have to get your lake and streambed alteration agreement. And so previously we've done particle tracking modeling that would indicate there haven't been substantial impacts. But as a request of CDFW, we are updating that modeling. It was done back in 2015. And so I guess in short, I could get back to you on that, but we will have some modeling results that will speak exactly to that question. We just don't currently have the most updated information.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Yes, Member Hueso.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask a question whether regarding the permanence of the barrier. You mentioned that it's removable, or you're going to be applying as a temporary project. And I just want to understand, I understand the concept of what it would do. Have you been able to establish an actual elevation, a water elevation, where saltwater intrusion no longer begins to move upward? In other words, if you can make the barrier a certain height and make it a permanent barrier, and when you have higher inflows, the water can kind of go over the barrier, so allow for proper drainage. But when the elevations of the water get too low, that the barrier will immediately function as a way to redirecting the water around to another area. Have you been able to establish what that level is?
I personally haven't. Are you speaking to like an operable barrier, perhaps?
No, just a permanent barrier, but at a certain height. When the water level gets too low, the barrier would be at the level that would redirect the water to a different direction. And when the water level gets too high, as far as the outflows, it'll go over the barrier to allow for proper drainage. I'm just trying to establish if the barrier height, if you know what the specific height is where the ocean was, because I know it's complicated because you have tidal inflows and outflows, but is there a specific area? Maybe it would be at sea level, right? But what is sea level, right? It depends on the time of day. I understand that, but the delta is very complicated. I understand, because I mean, even we're maybe about 100 miles away from Sacramento, yet the height of probably the elevation of Sacramento City is about 30 feet above sea level, but the river is probably lower. You're probably looking at 10 feet above sea level where the river is on any given day, depending on the amount of rainfall that's coming down or the kind of snow melt that can raise the river anywhere from 10 to 15 feet. And at that level, you're probably seeing no salinity impacts, even with a higher elevation, a higher tide. So I'm just trying to gather if we know where we could establish the barrier at a height that could, at a more medium level, prevent saltwater intrusion on a more permanent basis.
I'd like to welcome Jacob McQuirk to the table from the Department of Water Resources.
Thank you very much. Again, I'm Jacob McQuirk with DWR Operation and Maintenance. And to get at your question, so really the way the barrier is designed, it's designed above the high tide elevation. So we've looked at what would a submerged barrier do, you know, understanding that salt water is heavier. And what we found is it wouldn't do a whole lot. But you did ask another question, and another question that really caught my attention was you had asked about, well, what kind of permanent solutions are there? And there are some permanent solutions, and the one that we have looked at in the past, and really it was a project that CDFW was looking at, and that was the Frank's Track Futures. So one thing about Frank's Track is if you did decide to restore Frank's Track and and fill it in and make it into wetlands or some sort of a habitat, you could basically have about the same benefits you would have from West Falls River. But understanding that that's a very big, expensive project that's going to take many years to plan, design, and fund, of course. But so that's the one permanent solution that I do know is potential. But as far as the elevation of the barrier, really, like I said, we did look at what a submerged barrier would do. It's not really going to be effective. So what we really do need is we need a barrier that is above that high tide elevation. So we're really not seeing any water flowing over the barrier, but we are seeing water flow through the barrier. Remember, it is built with rock, so it's not like it's an impermeable barrier. We do see some flow back and forth through the barrier. Did that help answer your question?
Yeah, and just to make it clear, you don't think there is a level where the outflows could ever flow over the barrier?
No, not really. Because again, remember when we're talking about the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta, the big factor that changes the elevation is the tide. And so we can see even when we're having flood flows inflowing into the Delta, it's not like we see a major increase in stage. It's really that high tide that drives the higher elevations. The highest elevations we typically see are during those king tides.
And so if you put the barrier at the highest elevation during the king tides, it wouldn't really do a whole lot to prevent I mean, that would basically make it a more of a permanent barrier that would not allow water to go over anyway.
Well, yeah, if we used a different type of material to build the barrier, then it could potentially be impermeable. But anytime we use rock like we do, it's going to continue to be porous and continue to have flow back and forth through it. But the thing is we really need, the way I look at it is it's a plumbing change. So we really need that plumbing change. We need that blockage in False River that's this great conveyance so that it drives the water in different directions. So if you for example, if you were to put it a much lower elevation, maybe only halfway there, we did look at that. It's just not going to change the way the water moves well enough to affect the benefit that we need.
And it is am I correct in interpreting that it is a removable barrier?
Correct, absolutely. So we use large marine construction equipment to install it, cranes and scows and stuff, and the materials all
I
done.
actually have a video of it being built in April, so I can.
So it's going to be, you're going to
22.
be installing it and removing it,
Yeah,
installing it, removing it.
it does. I understand the concern, but yeah, we install it and we remove it. And
Wouldn't it be easier just to leave it in place?
well, it would be, but it also would. It's a totally different project at that point in time. So really, what we're looking at is a temporary measure that provides relief during the drought conditions. So at this point, we really haven't planned looking for a permanent type of project. And then if it was a permanent, that's a whole nother level of planning effort that we would have to undertake. At this point, we really haven't looked at it as a permanent, but understanding that I think Ibrahim mentioned where we're looking at now is the drought barrier could be in for less than a year or up to 20 months. And really similar to what we did the last time we installed it, the drought didn't go away. So what we realized is we needed to keep that barrier in place longer. So that's exactly what we did. We left it in for 20 months. And so that's the same thing we're really proposing here is, if 1 year does it well enough, then great. We'll remove it at the end of that season. If we're still in a drought and we still need that protection, then we'll leave it for the next year. And then we'll remove it the following fall period.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just every scoop a rock. You got to scoop the rock out, got to dump it in. And
Would you have to apply for a permit to remove it?
well, we are applying for the permits to be able to install and remove it up to 2 20-month periods during a 10-year period.
Okay, Member Moranian and then Member Burgess.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question to that. And probably you explained this already, but what is the negative impact of not removing it? Because again, I'm stuck in the same issue of putting and taking it back and the cost and the labor and all that and all kinds of impact. But if it stays there, what kind of negative impact does it have?
I think I would have to get back to you on that one because I
Okay.
really haven't got into that because we really haven't evaluated what it would
But-
be as a permanent barrier.
But you think it will be damaging?
Not necessarily. It's just the hydrodynamics are gonna be changed. We wouldn't see it as like a flood issue or anything like that, but it's not needed. And so then you've also got other concerns like, there are potentially navigation delays. We still allow navigation, but with that rock barrier, it's not as direct of a shot to go from the San Joaquin to like areas like Bethel Island. So there are other issues associated, but we don't see any real severe impacts associated with that barrier being in place.
Thank you.
Yes, was that your question, Diane?
Oh, no, I got a couple.
Okay.
And
We have
Jorge,
8
if
minutes.
I'm crossing a line, tell me, because I'm super curious and,
Always really good about it.
okay, thank you. So, no. So originally as a concept, there were a lot of people that were really upset about this. But it seems that and when you say 15 and 21, because I was looking, I have a video if anybody wants to see it, and if I need to provide it for records or whatever, I can do that. But it looked like it was being installed in April of 22. So is that a result of the that's what my video says, but I could be wrong.
You can go ahead and answer that.
Was it from the drought of 21 that it was being installed in 22?
I could probably clarify. So if it's April 22, that would have been, let's see, about a little less than so we installed it in 2021, in
Okay.
June of 2021.
Oh, okay.
We notched the barrier. So
Oh,
we
okay,
took
then that's
the
what I was
middle
thinking.
section
Okay.
out of the barrier in
Yeah.
January, and
Okay.
you're probably looking at that notch getting filled back in around
Okay.
April.
Okay. So, have you learned things from those 2 times that you're going to do things differently? I'm just curious. That's like,
You could speak to that, Jacob.
Yeah, absolutely. We've learned a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'm 100% prepared to get into all of the lessons learned,
Yeah.
but we've learned a lot. We've learned how to work better with the local community.
Right.
We've learned, some of the challenges. One of the things we learned also coming from the first installation back in 15 to 21 is we learned we can also get a much more economical barrier by having the rock moved from our storage facility in Stockton. So that was a huge win. Like, for example, the first year we'd moved it from a different site that was out in Rio Vista, and it was much more challenging. We didn't get as competitive of bids.
yeah.
And so when we moved, so the source of the material being Stockton, it actually made the barrier much more economical and
Yeah.
also enabled us to close it quicker. So that was a win as well.
And that was one of my questions is, are you keeping this rock nearby so that you
Absolutely.
can, not,
Yeah. So
it
we're
lowers-
really lucky in this particular, I guess maybe it's not luck. Our Division of Flood Management at the Department of Water Resources, they took this action to prepare and build this facility in Stockton. And this facility is a great facility. It stores rock and it also allows us to easily get that rock and replace it. So we've got conveyors, we can put a scow up there next to it. And so it really helps with the handling. And so that was a big win to be able to have that facility.
Yeah. And I do,
And the rock stays there too.
yeah, yeah. And so this is an area that I represent. So I'm, it's interesting because I haven't heard a lot of pushback on it since it went from concept to actually doing this thing. So it's interesting. I do reserve the fact that there may be people that may come out and have an issue with it if it comes before us. But it's, as someone that used to teach people about the Delta and about water, it's just like you have a faucet going this way, and then you have the ocean coming in this way. And when this faucet gets turned down and this isn't, that's when the saltwater intrusion happens. And there's an area between the Delta and the bay that is brackish, which is a mixture. And that is also a separate type of ecosystem. And so by doing this, we're trying to protect all those different ecosystems, all the different uses like navigation, but water supply, habitat, all of that. And so, I appreciate the work that you're doing. The other part of this, you're saying over 10 years, we're talking about sea level rise. And that's a whole other part of the formula that we can't even really anticipate, but I'm sure that's a part of the consideration.
Absolutely. But one thing we can luckily say, within 10 years, we're not going to experience a lot of sea level rise that's going to cause an issue. But yeah, looking into the future, we all know that sea level rise is a challenge that we're going to have to deal with in the Delta. And it's going to make things more challenging. I mean, you have a higher sea level rise, everything's going to be harder. It's going to take more outflow to keep the Delta salt fresh.
And is the mechanism for putting the barrier in strictly related to climate change issues, not necessarily the amount of water that's being removed for the Delta for other uses?
I would say that climate change exacerbates the problem, but nonetheless, remember we are in California, so there's always been a history of cyclical droughts. And
Right.
so I think that, even pre-climate change, there could have been a period of long drought where, if we had the civilization and all the projects in place and all the uses, that we might need it. But at this point, yeah, we're really not looking at the climate change or or increased sea level
Okay.
rise.
And kind of going to Councilmember Hueso's thing, similar to his question, has there been any, is this temporary kind of approach the one that you kind of want? There's no effort right now to look for some sort of permanent type of.
I think the challenge again there is, when I mentioned the effort that was done to look at restoring Frank's Track, it's a very expensive process.
Right.
CDFW did some excellent work to advance that, but I think where everybody's sitting now is there's no funding to advance that.
Right.
So if, just the planning and the permitting, not even considering construction costs, is quite a bit of funds, and that's just not in place at this point in time.
Okay. And then the last thing I'll just say is, as far as water supply, Antioch is currently putting in a desalination, even though they have what's called brackish water. There is an anticipation, but they're really not anticipating having to do saltwater desal. They're and so this also, I don't know, does that impact things in that area?
So as far as Antioch's desalinization?
Yeah.
I can't imagine that it would.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a couple of questions. What is the cost, and is the federal government helping with any of that cost, since the Central Valley pumps also?
So I'll answer the second part.
benefit?
Yes, the federal government did help us with the last installation, but I don't have the dollars memorized, so I'm going to turn to Ibrahim.
Install and removal is about $20 million construction.
Okay. And I noticed on one of the slides that you had with the ebb flow, where when you put the barrier in, it looks like the salt water backed up into the river. So does that have any impact? It backed up to the north?
So I see the question. The question being really, are there areas that see increased salinity? And the answer to that is yes. You do see salt pushing further up to San Joaquin and up to Sacramento. We didn't observe any direct impacts, but I mean, it's definitely saltier.
Got it. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Nope. All right. Perfect. Well, we ended that one on time. So thank you very much for your presentation. I'll ask for public comment on it.
No, Madam Chair, there's no public comment in the room nor online. Councilmember Zangali? Nope, you're still
Okay.
muted.
Sorry about that. No public comment here.
All right. Thank you. So next up, we have our Delta Water Master update. So I'll introduce Jay Ziegler, our Delta Water Master.
I'm just wondering about the deck.
Can we get this presentation online?
Great, thanks. Madam Chair, members of the council, it's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I will plan to cover just a few topics here, and we can probably start on slide 3, because I'll just jump into the introduction of things I want to talk with you about today. I want to give you an overview of where we are in water year reporting for water year 23 and 24. Additionally, how water rights reporting will intersect the implementation of the new Cal Waters database project at the State Water Resources Control Board. Cover a current regulatory process underway at the board, overhauling regulations associated with water rights reporting, which was initiated by Senate Bill 88 in 2016. And I want to talk about the Delta Adapts project that the Stewardship Council has undertaken, and a number of both multi-benefit initiatives as well as South Delta project. So if we might go to slide 3, please. Great. Actually, let's back up one. Okay, so I just want to give you a sense. We have just, as I've reported with the Stewardship Council previously, we are using an OpenET satellite-based data system for agricultural water use reporting in the legal delta. And agricultural use of water in the delta comprises water use across more than 400,000 acres of the 650,000 acre delta region. And of course, we're looking at other diversion metrics for urban water supply and other gauge systems to provide integrated data for those purposes as well. But what I'm showing you here is last year we had a 98% reporting level. That is unprecedented in California. We are way ahead of the average water reporting compliance. That's one of the major reasons why the state has undertaken this Cal Waters database initiative, as well as updating the Senate Bill 88 regulations in order to improve overall compliance. Just yesterday, we sent notice of violation letters to 20 diverters across the legal delta for non-compliance with their reporting obligations. And so we take this very seriously. We are giving additional time to reporters in the Delta, and part of that is there is a time lag. The water year reporting concludes on October 1, and that is the opening for, so for water year 25, you would report your usage effective October 1. The OpenET database has about a 60-day time lag in integrating multiple data sources so that we're getting measuring for better accuracy for reporting. And I'm really pleased at both the time scale and spatial scale of increased accuracy from the OpenET database. So we feel really good about these results. I think when I reported to you last year, I projected that we would be ahead of compliance last year. We're not quite there yet, but effectively what will happen is that we are extending, we will have until June 1 to incorporate water year reporting for the 2024 water year. Let's go to the next slide. So I want to talk just a little bit about this OpenET data system that we're using. It is increasingly used across the Western United States for its validity in measuring and helping to integrate both groundwater and surface water usage. In Colorado, it's used for in the upper basin to measure for releases of water from reservoir operations as well as diversions in the system. It's used to balance groundwater and surface water usage in and conservation actions in the Colorado River Basin. It's used to develop water basin analytics in Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. And so this is a increasingly useful and accurate tool in measuring water usage throughout the West. And I just want to particularly thank the Central and South Delta water agencies for providing intellectual capital and funding in order to bring this system online for Delta water reporters. And again, the universe of reporters that we're talking about across these 400,000 acres of cultivated agriculture in the legal Delta, there are over 1,200 individual rights holders across the Delta. And there are some 3,000 points of diversion that we're measuring that are aligned with a specific place of use. And so I do want to encourage you to look at deltaacp.com. It's an incredible resource to understand a very localized level of consumptive use in the Delta. Next slide, please. So this turns to a current regulatory process that the state board has undertaken with regard to updating the water use reporting regulations. This action is before the board. A draft proposal was published last year, released with updates in February. There's a public hearing on April 16th to review comments to the board's draft proposal. And then in conjunction with the integration of this new Cal Waters database, the regulations would go into place for water year, the current water year reporting. So for users in water year 25, that they're going to be reporting in the new Cal Waters system. And at this, and what this means for water users and reporters in the Delta, effectively, we're going to close down the current ERIMS water database at the state board on July 1. And so, and migrate to the new Cal Waters database on October 1. So we're going to go into kind of a quiet period, if you will, on when the databases are closed. And hopefully, at the end of that period, I'll be back telling you we had a smooth integration of the OpenET database to allow the continuation of this system, which again, about 80% of in-Delta diverters will be using for reporting this year. Next slide, please. So I want to just take a moment to really compliment the work of Jeff Henderson and Morgan Chow in the Delta Adapts effort. This is, as you all are aware, an effort to think about the climate change challenges as they affect the Delta. And I am very excited about this project, and I look forward to continuing to engage directly with the council in implementation of the Delta Adapts initiative and its program. I want to talk a bit about, in thinking about Delta Adapts, there is a great opportunity to align very different issues, whether it's groundwater projects and accounting for those projects in the Eastern Delta, floodplain restoration in the North and Eastern Delta, environmental justice and providing safe, clean drinking water to communities in and around the Delta and that rely on the Delta as a source of water supply, and critical Delta maintenance actions, levee programs, where should we prioritize resources consistent with the Delta levee investment strategy, and the ongoing Delta levee programs initiatives. And then I think fundamentally it's important for the council to establish regular check-ins to evaluate progress in adaptation strategies and actions around the Delta. Next slide, please. So I want to talk in particular about a South Delta circulation and channel maintenance effort that my office, the Office of the Delta Water Master, is involved in. And I just want to thank Jacob McQuirk and the Department of Water Resources for their co-involvement in this effort. We are hopeful that we can engage the Bureau of Reclamation and the Corps of Engineers in this program. And what it's really about is a recognition that the ongoing sedimentation in the South Delta is an unsustainable condition for the environment, for farmers, for water agencies, and the environment, and that we need an active dredging program along with a more predictable funding base for levee maintenance in order to effectively maintain channel utilization, channel access, the ability to have water flowing through these channels to protect both water quality and water supply availability. And I'm pleased to report that I've met with more than 20 stakeholders from the flood control agencies, irrigation districts, reclamation districts, county governments in the South Delta to really get buy-in to this effort to integrate both policy actions as well as funding necessary to address this accelerated impact of sedimentation in the South Delta. And this is it's a huge issue. It affects the exercise of water rights in the South Delta. It affects the project's availability of water. As Mr. Wesa noted, it affects the elevation of water levels if we're not maintaining these channels, which is required by D 1641, which was enacted in 2004 by the State Board. So there is a regulatory mandate that actually rides behind this, which has been largely ignored since the last dredging action was in 2009. So we really need to pay attention to this. We can't just ignore it. It affects water quality and water availability in the South Delta region. And I should also note that the Department of Water Resources just released a monitoring and special studies report to look at salinity conditions in the South Delta that is directly related to this issue. And the comment deadline for that is April 30th. So it's important, I think, that the council be on record recognizing the importance of the ongoing efforts to address water quality, water availability, and the impaired conditions of South Delta channels. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about one project in the South Delta that's related to this effort is the Paradise Cut project. Riding with the project is also a commitment to address a 39-mile configuration of dredging. The Paradise Cut project would involve also stepping back levees where the lower San Joaquin River hits the Delta at Middle and Old Rivers in Paradise Cut and provide greater capacity to absorb flood events without impacts to communities. And so this is a really important initiative in the Southern Delta that I would also put in the lens of adaptation strategies as we think about the flood and extended drought scenarios in the South Delta, as well as the need to address habitat needs in the Delta. Next slide, please.
It's also one of the high priority habitat restoration areas identified in the Delta Plan.
Yeah. So and another high priority area identified in the Delta Plan is the North Delta Arc. And this is a mosaic of habitats kind of encompassing an arc from southern Solano County across Yolo County and over into lower Sacramento County. A range of restoration projects have been proposed there. And extending over to the Cosumnes, there are a series of floodplain enhancement projects that are being studied to expand flood capacity in the lower Cosumnes and Mokelumne basins, opportunities for enhanced groundwater banking there as well. And additionally, as Chair Lee noted, the DPIC meeting will address the opportunity to expand recreation in southern Sacramento County at the Delta Meadows Park at the next DPIC meeting on April 3rd next week. And so all of these, I think, provide an opportunity to more openly invite Delta tribal governments to the table to engage in co-management programs, protect cultural resources, and apply traditional ecological knowledge along with conventional science to achieve better habitat and wider Delta management objectives. So I just think I'm so excited about Delta Adapts as a forum to bring lots of these issues together. Next slide, please. Additionally, again, this is the upper left image is what we see today in lower Putah Creek. And clearly enhancing both ecological function there as well as just the opportunity to think through a lens of multi-benefit. What can we do for additional groundwater storage when we see these high flow events coming into the Delta? And can we think also about some of the active restoration projects in the Cache Slough complex and make sure that we're modeling to achieve the right habitat outcomes, that we're getting the right kind of energy to push phytoplankton and zooplankton into the Delta. Next slide, please. In the Western Delta, dealing with Web Tract and other areas, I want to compliment Metropolitan Water District for its ongoing work in identifying multi-benefit habitat, cropping strategies, levee maintenance, and other programs in a programmatic approach to address the impacts of subsidence and flood vulnerability in the Western Delta. And this is another issue, as Supervisor Burgess noted, that we need to be paying attention to in terms of vulnerability of the Western Delta and its effects on water quality over time. Next slide, please. So I want to flag just a few issues for the Council's consideration in the months ahead. I think I've appreciated the attention that DPIC is giving to the harmful algal blooms issue. I think DPIC's work is helping to better integrate the science that is being done by different agencies across state government. My cautionary note in this area is that while we're getting better at the science, we're not really getting better at the planning for the inevitable surge in HABs issues in the South Delta. And so I think this is going to require an investment of funds that is not currently on the table, but that is critically important for communities and the state and federal projects that rely on a quality water supply and not one that is infused with cyanotoxins. And so I just want to flag this as an issue of continuing concern for the council. Next slide, please. The California Forever project is still with us. There have been recent iterations to combine the development of a new community with a shipbuilding operation at Collinsville. And so we're watching this closely. We have done a detailed water supply analysis that we have shared with the council and are continuing to look for more information as this project evolves. But clearly there is a water supply issue of substantial concern in how you would meet the needs of both the pilot community, but especially a 400,000 person community in the Delta. So we're watching this closely. And next slide, please.
Can I ask a question? Is that area part of the primary delta or is it secondary?
It's both, actually. It's in the
Because the shipping
yeah.
channel has been, it just came, I actually just became more aware of it, and I was just curious how much that involves this council.
Yeah. So, so to directly kind of deal with your question, that there are 66,000 acres in ownership that related to the proposed project now. And so we don't really know which areas will be designated for urban development versus which elements may be used for some kind of mitigation. So I think it's in this gray area where it kind of transcends both boundaries.
And there's a lot of dredging that would be involved in that as well.
Well, it's on a ship development
for the shipbuilding
project.
part
Yes.
of it. Yeah.
All right, and I think with that, I'm happy to take counsel. I did have a video here that would just kind of remind us all at the end of the day of how beautiful the Delta really is. I'm not sure whether that came through. It's the bald eagle slide there. It's just it's so. Yeah, there you go. Exactly, right? That's, no, I've been kind of exploring the Delta throughout the winter, especially the bypass region and the flooding conditions. And just happened upon this eagle taking advantage of the one coot that got left behind there. And so don't be the last to leave the party, I guess, is the moral of that story. But anyway, thank you, and thanks for your continued collaboration across so many issues, and appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Great, thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. I especially appreciated your tie-in with the Delta Adapts and the work that we're doing here on that. So that was super helpful to see how that's all working together. Any members have any questions for Mr. Ziegler? All right, seeing none. I will go ahead and ask for public comment.
No public comment at our location or online.
And no-
Councilmember Zingali?
No public comment in Eureka.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr.
Right.
Ziegler.
Thank you.
In preparation for our next council meeting, I'd like to inform you that it's going to take place on April 24th. This one will be in the Delta, so we'll be on a location, not here. But we will put that in the meeting notice, so please refer to that for further information or updates. And with that, we're adjourned.